Thank you. Welcome. My name is RR3. I'm from the Netherlands. Gerard and Mike back here that are working on the airport entities project. And the reason why we really wanted a joint session with some of the other rooms is because while we're working on the project, we are identifying airport-specific objects. We'll not be extending the schema as in adding it to the schema, but we're going to be using the buildingSMART data dictionary to extend the schema with the airport entities. Meaning that we have created a mapping to existing IFC entities based on IFC 4.3. And we kind of came to the conclusion when we started going through the different airport-specific objects that they're not necessarily airport-specific because there's a lot of overlap with the other rooms like the railway room, building room, product room, the infra room. So that's why I really wanted this discussion with you guys on how we want to move forward working with those objects. So as an example, we have, there's a few examples. We have the IFC roads already existent. We have some predefined types in there already. And our proposal from the airport room is to keep the IFC road, for example, for a runway, which is very airport specific, and add the runway as a predefined type to the existing entity. And before moving forward, we kind of wanted to discuss with you guys how you guys look at it, how to move forward, if you guys have any ideas, because you guys are the specialists on infra, railway, etc. There's a few more. I have a list available. There's wayfinding, for example, very important, but it's not just airports that have wayfinding. So there's a few of them. So definitely an open discussion.
And maybe in addition, this was part one, content. Part two was procedures, because we invented several procedures how to invite the external audience into development. But we noticed that the other rooms already also have different procedures how to cooperate with other with external guys, or how to develop the things, or how to get in contact with the software ventures. And it seems to us necessary also to exchange experiences in that, because everyone can learn from the others, and maybe we can also establish some standard procedures we always make in common all together, to make things actually more professional, or maybe things actually more faster in development. So this was part number two from our point of view, but we can collect maybe the different meanings or the different ideas, and then we start discussion.
That was my intro, so I really wanted to be an open discussion. I can grab the list of entities, or I'm really open for anything. It's really looking forward together, and just because there's so much overlap with your guys' specialty, we're just curious to see what your ideas are, and if you guys are like, wait, what are you guys doing? Don't move that direction, then I'm very open for that discussion here.
Could it be a solution that we show very briefly our entities project?
Yep.
Does that help? But at least that we have some guidance in how we looked at this.
We could use the slides for tomorrow.
I'm not sure how to share online as well, but
how other organizations produce recommendations like environmental schemes or guidance on health and safety, and so which, but all of those things, ideally we'd like to see them being checked automatically. We've got a number of steps on the way towards that. I think the other thing I'd say is that as a room, we try and have as open approach as possible. Not only at the summits, but every 6 months in between the summits, we have an open house online, which anyone can sign up to do. And that's helped us find new audiences and also make us aware of some of the misunderstandings that are out there. We've had regulators say, I'm not buying a copy of Revit, Bentley, ArchiCAD and Navisworks and so on. So We try and be as open as possible. And then the projects are the things that then go into the formal process that the buildingSMART Standards Committee asks for. And it's an important distinction. Anyone and anything can be discussed in the room. We have a very good steering committee, which is now grown to 9 or 10 people. And we've got 2 projects underway at the moment. The first one is regulatory information requirements. What additional information do we want in our building models to help answer the questions that regulators ask? Every country has different regulations, but it always tends to be about the same things. So we think that we can make a real contribution, particularly to the buildingSMART Data Dictionary, the extra properties that people need to describe to support that. Our other project is to meet the challenge that regulators don't turn up at meetings. They tend to be tied to their government desks or whatever. And so we're going to produce guidance for regulators about the use of OpenVIM, so that we can get something to them to get their attention and interest. I mean, we've done surveys to check on people's attitudes and the appetite for the steps towards automated code compliance. So there's and coming out of meetings this morning where we were discussing our roadmap, there was a strong lobby to say that we should look at the whole question of greenhouse gases as embodied carbon in use, in other words, energy usage, and also life cycle replacement impacts for carbon, and treat that, because increasingly that is being regulated. And I think buildingSMART has a role in making sure that the information is available to answer those questions. So that was a challenge. And the other big challenge, which we've looked at before and we need to look at again, is buildingSMART has worked very hard on the interoperability for solutions, buildings, built assets. And we want to look again at interoperability of requirements. How can we express requirements in such a way that we don't have to write special code to check the Lithuanian regulations and the Estonian regulations and the Latvian regulations and the Finnish? What can we do to make the rules exist independent of software, in the same way as we've made building information independent of software? So that's a quick introduction to what we do. Sorry. And I think, the bigger question about life cycle is that increasingly regulation is not just looking at permission to build. Increasingly regulators are saying that you need a license to occupy a building, or you need to be re-inspected every 5 years to continue occupying a building. And that's changing the kinds of things that are regulated. And it's mean that what in the UK is called the golden thread is increasingly important. I can't say that the UK government has come up with a very good answer for the golden thread. We have to wait a few more months to find out how wrong they've got it. But the idea is there that regulations are turning into a continuous process in many cases. And that means we've got to think about the life cycle of the information and how we can preserve it and maintain it, and generally to value it. So I think those are the things we're interested in. We're having a joint session with the building room because they've got a group looking at fire and escape simulation, which is different from regulation. So we've got some interesting overlaps to discuss there. And I think some regulations are very prescriptive and easy and relatively easy to check. sometimes they get performance-based, and then we get into the world of simulation. So we have to manage those two things. So that, yeah, does that pose any questions? Yes, of course.
Yes, so if I say too much, then please say something about it. What I understand is that there is a building or an asset, a design, and it needs to be checked versus something.
Yeah.
You say it's regulation. We say it's program of requirement, EIR, whatsoever. Is there a fundamental change in the check on regulations compared to the check on the EIR or things like that?
I think there is a difference between information requirements and checking of it. It's a spectrum, and I don't think you could slice the problem and say that is information requirements and that is regulatory. But let's be honest, regulations are a lot more complicated than information requirements. There are more exceptions, it's a more complicated thing, and the documents are written by people who aren't interested in BIM, let's be honest. They're interested in safety and yeah, sometimes regulations are written to give powers to regulators. And all of those things don't apply to EIRs. I think, you know, the IDS, which is the latest proposal from buildingSMART for sharing information requirements, it's unlikely to be able to support regulatory checking. And there's some technical reasons for that. And maybe there'll be a version 2 which is more powerful, but I think we have to find other solutions.
So if I understand correctly, then the regulatory check is more complicated and the information required check is more simple.
Yes.
So if we
and
could use the regulatory check and have a tick in the box, is this a regulatory check? No, it is a AR check. Could we use the same platform, software, whatsoever?
If we solve the problem with regulatory checking, we would also have solved the problem of information requirements. Yeah, eventually. I think there are other things that come into the regulatory environment, like every decision has to be explainable and evidence and signed off and supportable, because it's society inspecting the proposal. Things like EIRs are private and they often get renegotiated during the course of a contract or whatever. And to a far higher degree, the regulatory requirements are not negotiable. So everything has to be justifiable. Any decision has to be traced back and everything. So, it's outsiders looking at designs and buildings and occupancies and use and so on. And so it's tougher.
And adding to that, if you're able to hear me, the regulatory side, usually, at least in Finland, it has the national level, but it also has the city level of regulations. So there are various stages and many rules that are actually applying to that. And in the same case, it might have these like limits on where you can build on the plot of the land. So there might be a distance limit or something like that, which is not necessarily part of the asset information requirements, but it's a requirement of being further out from some other border. So it adds complexity to the system, and also part of the regulation is also the fire safety. At least in my knowledge in Finland, that you have to pass also those checks, and that's also another aspect on the regulation. It applies also to airports. So.
Can we answer Leila's question?
Can we have more context? Is there a presentation first, and that it is hard to follow? I do have a presentation, but it's very much on our own project. But we do have some examples in there, so I can go through some slides a little bit more quicker than what I usually would, and get to the point of the list of objects that we want to discuss with you guys and your expertise, if that's okay with you guys. Okay. All right, well, I guess I'll give my presentation here then. The Airport Entities Project, like I mentioned at the beginning, a few of us, working group of about 5 people, Auckland Airport, Schiphol Airport, Vienna Airport, and NACO. We are working on this project for about 2 years now. And basically we're doing the same thing that everyone is doing. We want to use IFC, extend it for our specific needs. And so our specific needs are airports. So today it is just not clear. There's not a clear and consistent schema. So a lot of people throughout the asset lifecycle will start using the proxy building element proxy. And it just causes a lot of, how do you say that, miscommunication throughout the asset lifecycle because we don't know what is being meant with the building element proxy. So what we want is a creation of clear agreements within the airport community so that we can work with just the necessary parts of the schema. When Alex Warp started this project, it was really meant to extend on the schema with a new version. But since Leon introduced the buildingSMART data dictionary, or I'm not sure if it was Leon, but the buildingSMART data dictionary was introduced at buildingSMART, we kind of shifted and were able to move into the direction where we will be using the BSDD to extend the schema with our entities. Can we go to the next slide? So I think it's pretty clear. Just to give you an idea of some of airport-specific project or objects, we have an empty return gate, we have automated border control readers, we have approach light mast, and we have check-in conveyors, just to name a few. And those 4 are actually used for a pilot that we did to really add those entities to the BSDD. It was very successful, together with our colleague Maya Trifona, who's also part of the airport room. But just to kind of give you an idea of the objects that are that we are working on in the airport room, but the list is a lot longer than those 4. I don't think I have to explain this to you guys, but so this is how we work today. So all of the stakeholders involved are talking about a baggage conveyor, but because we're all calling it our own baggage conveyor, there is no clear communication between all of the different stakeholders. So Vienna Airport can call it Vienna Airport Baggage Conveyor. NACO has its NACO baggage conveyor. It's just not clear. So if you go to the next slides, this is what we are working on to get those clear agreements so that all of the parties involved, whether it's within the same project or if it's an airport in the United States or an airport in China, we're all talking about the same baggage conveyor by using the same language. So it's really just creating one language based on the airport specific objects that are necessary for the airport room. So what we did is we agreed on a list of airport entities. So we asked a lot of our stakeholders, different airports, different organizations from the airport steering committee to deliver us a list of airport specific entities that are necessary for or that they use in their facility. So we got a list from Auckland Airport, China Aviation University, Finavia, NACO, Schiphol, and Vienna. So we combined all of those lists, took out all of the objects that were the same, removed the duplicates. We categorized the airport objects, which you can see by the tags. So here you have a baggage handling system, for example. And then we started mapping it to IFC 4.3. And we spend about, I think, a year. we meet weekly for an hour. We mapped, to the best of our knowledge, our expertise, the entities or the objects to the existing IFC schema. And at the same time, we introduced the user-defined types if it was needed. So for a few of them, we were just able to use the ones that are already existent. But there are still a lot of them that would need airport-specific user-defined types. And with that one, that's where I need all of you. That's where we came to the conclusion, wait, is this really airport specific, or do we need more input from the building room, from the other rooms? Yes.
That would be my question regarding the input from other rooms. Have you ever talked to manufacturers about the properties
So what we did, and it's actually in the next couple of slides. I don't know if it's right behind this one. If you go to the next one. No, not yet. This is the input, but I'll answer your question real quick. We created surveys. So we did a proposal on the best of our knowledge. We created a survey, and that survey went on LinkedIn, and we shared it with all of our connections. And based on that, we were able to gather input from BIM experts, but also from object matter experts from all over the world. So we basically asked them, do you agree with the naming that we proposed? And do you agree with the proposed mapping to IFC, as well as a predefined type or user-defined type?
And we got a lot of response about it.
Yes.
So it seems to be working.
We hope. But at the same time, it's still very airport specific. So I'm not sure, like it's still a lot of companies working for airports. But for example, the railway room, which there's a lot of overlap with the railway room, I doubt they responded. So that's why we wanted the joint session to discuss that here at the summit, now that we're able to be live again. So if they go to the next slide, I don't think we have to go into the technical details, but we used Airtable at first as a tool, but it was a lot of manual labor. So we switched over to BIMQ with the knowledge of Christoph from Vienna Airport to kind of structure the input that we are getting. And it's also very easy to then extract it and create the survey, but also in the future to use it within your Revit models or whatever model you're using.
We also had we also got their support for the newest IFC releases. So the XML files with the IFC structure are already implemented. So we can choose the standard definitions from IFC already. We don't need to type everything in by ourselves. This is also helpful because when you have to search for that all the time, the website is getting too long. So it's better for us also to keep control between the different IFC releases. When you see on the right side, there's the IFC 4.3 and the IFC 4, and we have more control between different IFC releases. In IFC 4, we had to declare a lot of things as building element proxy. It's not good because you can't check the IFC files later on so specific, because when everything is related to the proxy, you can't, actually it's not possible to have a type related checking. So you have a lot of properties to the proxy. You lose a little bit control, and with IFC 4.3 we have more specific entities we can use, and we have only more user-defined types, but it's much more precise to work like that. Okay, next slide. Then we can.
I think you can go. This is just how.
This is how we distribute. Yeah. We can already distribute all the definitions to BIM applications, not only Revit and Archicad, others as well. We only need to declare an internal mapping and so on. And this is how it looks like when we make the test settings, actually how to distribute the BIM application with the configuration. So we don't need to type in anything by ourselves. It's done automatically with configuration files. And yeah, these are checking objects to declare. Then we hand over this. Also, this is the IFC configuration, how to export this stuff. It's also delivered automatically. And next slide, please. Next slide, please. The good thing is actually we can also use, we have already checking rules inside Solibri which are connected to BIMQ, so we don't need to configure the checking rules by ourselves. Also, the whole data structure setup get delivered inside Solibri, and we have very detailed tests about the data structure already in the IFC files. So this procedure you see, it's configured in around about 5 minutes completely, with a very complex data structure setup in behind. And in former days, this took, I think, 3 weeks or so to configure something like this. Now it's 5 minutes, and we have a refreshed checking setup completely for all the content. And this is something we can deliver to all our stakeholders already from the group, because the difference maybe to the stuff they introduced yesterday in the session from Leon from Berlo was that they used an established open standard to distribute the data structure and the checking rules. Checking rules with IDS, data structure with BSDD. We are not based on that actually, but we want to have also in BSDD distribution. And the checking rules via IDS seems to be also no problem in future. But we already prepared the whole technical settings for it. And we want to distribute the IFC extensions exactly in this way in future.
So here's your question, answer on your question. So after doing all of this, we still need the 4 or 5 of us cannot be like, okay, this is it. This is what we're going to work with. So we created the Airport Entities Project to verify the proposed mapping of the airport-specific objects with subject matter expert, but also with BIM experts from all expertises. At the same time, we also wanted to verify the proposed names. I mean, I work for an airport, but it doesn't mean I know everything about baggage handling systems. So I need my experts to let me know whether the name that we decided on is the correct name. And, you know, if there's standardized naming conventions, we can use that. And I don't know, I'm not that, not that much of an expert. And at the same time, we wanted to check the completeness of the final list of airport-specific objects. I mean, these are lists that we gathered from different airports, but even now that we're going through the list, we're kind of looking at each other like, I think we forgot a couple of them. So we're also asking our subject matter experts, like, is this everything for example, baggage handling? And then last but not least, while we're sitting here, is identify the objects that have overlap with other rooms and discuss the proposed mapping in a joint session.
So if you translate that, is this approach something that you think is valuable for yourselves? You also answered that it's quite difficult, the regulatory checks. But maybe we can check whether these checks are different, and maybe we can define those checks and see whether there is a possibility in this way of working.
From all of the objects, we kind of categorized them to the best of our knowledge, and we came to 5 different surveys. The baggage handling systems, airport-specific security systems, and passenger control, navigate and meteorological equipment, and then civil airfields, and of course the terminal. And the terminal is really a building, but airport language, it's a terminal. The airport entities, or I'm sorry, the survey for the baggage handling systems, it actually closed last month. It was open for about 6 months. And here you can see the number of responses that we got. So that was very, very exciting to have so many people deliver input to the best of their knowledge. We also translated the survey to different languages with the help of the steering committee to get even more input. So we got 58 responses with a lot of valuable inputs, and some of the questions that we asked in the survey, besides like, do you agree with the naming and do you agree with the mapping? We also asked them if we're allowed to contact them if we have any further questions. And of course, we asked them, do you not want to join the airport room and help us further develop open standards for the aviation industry? So that's the next step, will be in the next slide. Is process the survey results. So go through all of it. If we have questions and we're allowed to contact the people, discuss that with them. There's a few things now that we have the BSDD available. It allows you to also add definitions so that when we're talking about a runway, are we all talking about the same runway? Because we don't want an airport in China to have a different definition about a runway than Schiphol does, for example. And if we do, then we have to see, are they still the same object that we're talking about? But we also want to add example images. We want to translate it so it's accessible for everyone. We want to add classifications and type-specific properties so that we're all talking about the same objects. We want to further research the use of the BSDD. I mean, everyone is talking about the BSDD, but I also have to explain it to my management, what it is, why we're using it, and how it will benefit the organization on a management and operational level. It's still not really clear for me. I know all the technical details, but the high over details, we still have to figure out to further develop on this. Of course, we want to add the finalized entities to the airport domain. So that's based on the surveys that we have right now. So the surveys will be translated for the other domains that I just showed you. They'll be going live probably in January, just because we're going into the holiday season and no one will respond. And then set an end date and gather all of the inputs, and then eventually add them to the airport domain. We're also talking, but we're also very curious to see what your opinion is on that, is implementing structured data templates to the asset models. Because we've noticed that even though we have a buildingSMART or a BSDD and our IFC entities, that we can still interpret the entities differently depending on who you are, what your expertise is, and where in the life cycle you're working on. Christoph mentioned it, the structured data template. It's still a discussion from my understanding within the different rooms. And of course, we also need to include our software vendors to really get involved, better collaboration, that they can also make this happen for realization. And then, of course, we want people to start using the airport domain through the BSDD. So what have we done so far looking at this year? Because we've been working on it since 2020. In 2020, we also, like I said, redefined the scope of the project because we were not going to be extending the IFC schema through a new version, but through the BSDD. So that definitely created a shift in the project scope. So the first 2 years, we've really focused on writing a new project proposal, sending out a lot of one-pagers to show the world what we're doing and to get more involvement, and work on the list of entities. And then this last year, we really focused on the surveys and getting more input from our subject matter experts. So that's basically what you see here. There's also a lot of technical stuff that we've done, like Christoph mentioned, the Airtable. It kind of took a while, so now we switched over to BIMQ, but it still took a lot of work to make that happen. I don't know if you can see the rest, but I guess this is kind of heavy. We created a mapping from IFC to other software standards, and we created the surveys that I just showed you that we're almost done with, so we can publish it. And then looking at the future, we also want to align with other aviation standards like ICAO and IATA. We have to still finish a detailed project plan. I'm not going to read all of it, but you can see it here. And I think the most important one is the surveys for now, and adding all of the airport objects to the BSDD so that it's accessible for everyone. And of course, coordinate with the other rooms about the entities that have overlap with them. So this is kind of a high over why we're here. I could have started with this slide. So our vision is to really further develop information standardization, not just from the airport's perspective, but really in collaboration with the other rooms. We want to position the airport room better within the aviation industry. It's still very, very challenging to get more organizations and more airports involved based on the open standards. And of course, we want to better connect and collaborate with the other rooms and have more discussions on the objects where there's overlap. So this is just a general, I think you can take out the airports and how will this benefit anyone when using IFC. So it's really essential for processing information for both the project phases, but also for your maintenance phase. Like in my opinion, there's still a gap between projects and maintenance. So when there's a project handover, I believe if it still feels like they're throwing it over the wall and being like, all right, I'm done. Good luck with it. It's your mess now. And I feel like we need to work on better getting that closer to each other and really filling that gap by the use of open standards. And I think this project will really help with that.
It's good to have the question if that's the way we started. We try to get some results. If this is something for other rooms to follow the same route, or say, no, this is because our product is quite different.
Could be, yeah.
We have to find another road to get to somewhere.
Yep. Next slide. Yeah, this is a little bit airport specific. So this is how we're trying to get more airports and more people involved. But I think the moral of this slide is specifically what you see here at the bottom of this slide is all of the stakeholders involved. They will all be benefiting from a standardized way of working, and in this case through IFC. So this is specifically for airports, just some bullet points of value propositions and who it will benefit by the end of the day. So it really goes from asset owners to our passengers, because the the end of the day, we want to give our passengers a good experience at our airports. Contribution, like I said, it's the in-kind contribution. We've been working weekly on this project. Carl Fitzpatrick from Auckland Airport couldn't join because of the time difference, but he's been a great help for this project. And since last year, we also got a little bit of monetary contribution. That was the first time. So it's a lot of in-kind contribution that we're doing right now, which is great. It's fun. And prepare for landing. That's why we're here. It's not in here, but I do have a list of just some objects. I can name a few that we identified as the overlap with the rooms. So when I look at the terminal, for example, we have a fire extinguisher or fire safety objects in general that they're not airport specific, but they are very, very important for airports. So we actually added them. Wow. So we did add them to the survey, but it's not up to us to decide how this fire extinguisher should be landing in the IFC schema. It's really something that we need to all agree on before adding it. I'm not even sure if we should be adding it to the airport domain in the BSDD. And that's really something that I'm very interested in discussing with you guys.
Maybe we can also have a look back on the slides for what we had before lunch with the workflow, the workflow with the handover workflow, because there's also some overlapping topic with the product declarations, and we can have a look for that.
More, and then it's one more. Up, yep, one more up.
Before the break, yeah.
Yes, and then one more up. And yeah, so the 42.
42.
42, yes.
So now we need to proceed to more simulation. We try to explain actually the complicated procedures of handover data and what is actually necessary for us to hand over and what are the problems. And we have one problem is that we want to carry more information with a single IFC file, because actually we need to split all the informations from the project information model in different containers, IFC files, DWG files, product documentations. And in future we want to have this all include in one IFC file, because this is actually the only possibility to hand over it with OpenCDE based transport mechanism, but also to verify the information in one single file. If you have different files, it's getting much more complicated to make sure that everything fits together. If you have it in one file, everything is fit together and you can check it completely with Solidly or something else. And this is very important for us to have a much faster handover stage, and to make sure that we can check everything faster, and also to make sure that the guys who hand over the stuff to us don't have so much mess with so much files all around. So this is actually a really important need from our side. We want also to discuss today.
Yes.
Just seeing these problems, there are a few things that come to mind, if I may. As Marek said yesterday, IFC can't do 2D, it can. And more importantly, in the regulatory scenario, the Koreans have taken an approach that because there's a legal requirement to stamp and sign drawings. But they've also developed some very sophisticated automatic checking processes that run on IFC. And their solution is that they expect IFC, they run the checks, and if the checks are passed, they automatically generate the 2D drawings from the IFC so that they can then stamp and sign them. And that gets us back to what BIM was meant to be in 1975, when we first invented it. that this distinction about 2D drawings and annotation and extra work was never meant to be part of the BIM process. As far as the round trip is concerned, I think we have to be really careful about responsibility. The whole point of a CDE in 19650 is that we don't round trip information. People are responsible for their own work, and if it needs changing, that person has to change it. When you start to talk about round trip, it's usually breaking contractual or legal obligations. If you start interfering with someone else's information, you are in trouble, or someone's in trouble. So I think that the challenge has been that if you use proprietary formats, they go obsolete at a rate of about, or there's a company in Australia that says that they're losing terabytes of building information every month because of the obsolescence of proprietary formats. What we've got to think about is saying, if it's an IFC, are the tools that will work natively with IFC? And as was said, there's probably one or two that are really good at this, and so on. So we shouldn't be, we mustn't get dragged into this round trip problem, because technically it's challenging, it's difficult, but legally we don't even want to try. That's a general comment. But otherwise, the idea of saying what is the deliverables, if IFC is the dominant or the lead, what they called yesterday the legally contractually significant model, and then you can support it with other documents if you have to. Probably not DWG. I really encourage people to think about SVG, because it does everything that DWG does, but it's non-proprietary. So that's a step forward. And and then I think building control, as I said, it's now cropping up everywhere. It's about getting planning permission. It's about getting permission to technical permission. It's about license to occupy, ongoing licenses. And so the regulatory thing, it pops up all the way along.
Maybe to explain the round trip, it was meant that when we are going to operate buildings and we want to rebuild the buildings 15 years later, as you said, native formats are not useful for that. They're not working anymore in long-term thinking. For that reason, we thought that if we carry rough information about the facilities in IFC, it's possible to have more or less standardized round-trip functionality to rewrite or to make IFC files editable later on. Because when we want to rebuild stuff, there is no other possibility. We need to carry the information about complex buildings in a way. You're right, inside the project information model, we don't need round-trip because the actually way how IFC is working is fine for that. It's only for the handover. So this is what we meant. And the 2D stuff is, we had a research project with the Austrian military in the last 4 years, and we already have a prototype implementation with improved IFC export and import add-ons for several applications that we are able to implement complete 2D drawings connected with the model anymore. So when we reopen the IFC file with the 2D drawings, the lines in the drawing are always connected with the model content. So you can completely refresh also the drawings from a changed model. So this is possible already without any change in IFC file. The only thing we need to add in IFC is an entity for the layouts and the viewports to transport the drawings. This is missing actually. For that reason, we need to use proxies for that with user-defined types.
You should use IFC annotation.
Yeah, maybe also for that one, yes, but this is the only gap we have to fill. Then we are able to carry also 2D drawings without any loss inside an IFC file. And the interesting thing about this is that you don't lose the connection between the drawing and the model, because this is losing when you're creating WGs, LVGs, and so on. This is really, really interesting for us, because also when you rebuild the building, you need a refreshed drawing. And making a refreshed drawing from a model without having the old plans and the connection to the plans is really hard work. And it seems it's not 15 years to rebuild the building, it's usually 5 months.
Yeah, I was just wondering that are our minds fixated on to the information on documents? Are we still fixated on it, or could we possibly start thinking ourselves in a different way?
But we need to deliver it. It's a question of the law.
Yeah, but it's not that I know that in Estonia it's not the case. So.
But how they make it if you're in a hotel room and you need to have the picture for the estimates? Is there a 3D picture and you need to understand it?
And you could have an iPad picture and look
in Firecase.
Yeah.
When the power is away and everything is. I think that there is a reason for 2D drawings also on the construction site.
There is, but I think we are really fixated on them, and that is creating a problem in this as well.
The problem is if you talk about huge facilities, you have buildings 70 years old, new buildings and so on, and you need some common information layer. And there is no 3D model from a building from the 50s. You need to have them in a common information layer actually. And for some reasons, 2D drawings already exist because you can transport information faster with people who are not familiar with 2D information about it. For example, if you're in a building you don't know and you want to know how to escape in Firecase, it's easier to have a 2D drawing for that than a 3D model, actually. You're right, that in many circumstances it makes sense to have 3D models instead of 2D drawings, but not in every case. It's beyond that there are so many use cases, and all these things here are necessary for several ones.
But the barrier between an IFC model and 2D drawings, I think it creates a lot of issues. It is of our resources. I've been, my job for 3 years was to check and review 2D drawings in a BIM-based project because my name went on the drawings, it didn't go on the BIM, so of course I was checking the drawings. But the thing is that when you can start construction, you need to make adjustments, modifications to the plans, you do them to the 2D documents, and maybe in the model if you have time, but you might not have time.
But with this technology, with embedded 2D drawings inside IFC, you don't do it. You have to
but I haven't seen it working yet.
We have a proof prototype finished this last year. So this is possible actually. We need the support from all the software ventures to get this running.
Yeah,
for sure.
but still, the problem is that everybody's so fixated on the 2D documents that we can't look the other way.
Yes, but you also different information in a 2D drawing than in a model. That's also a point. Right?
That's the issue, I think, that if people limit the IFC to general arrangement, then you end up with DWGs having to do other jobs like assembly details and so on. I think if we define ourselves by the old technology, I could argue that all buildings in the UK should be documented on parchment because there are buildings that were documented in parchment. That doesn't mean that all future buildings have to be documented in parchment. We have to allow something to do with the future. The legacy is legacy, and we can't be held back by saying, we're going to choose the technology from 20 years ago or 50 years ago to say, and that's our common standard. The common standard should be to have the information in the most useful form possible. And that will be IFC. In Norway, they talk about a hydroelectric dam that was built 6 years ago with no paper. They talk about a motorway project, a bridge that a couple of years ago that was done without drawings. And Finland is now talking again about giving building control permission to a building based purely on IFC. So
Yeah, there's currently an ongoing legislation proposal in the parliament about getting the building permit based on IFC models and getting the building, the completed building, the as-built as IFC. So that's a huge change, and that would actually happen in start of 2024. So not that far in the future.
As Saki Minto is saying, the ability to handle 2D information in IFC is very much needed by IFC. For building permits, there are many regulations for planned parcels with abstract shapes that are not real, and the idea of using IFC spatial zones footprints, for example, is not practical.
Masaki is very active in the building, in the regulatory room. But I would say, first of all, IFC can carry 2D information. That every object can have multiple representations. And so it's a matter of deciding how we use that. The other point that he makes about abstract shapes is that in planning terms, there are all sorts of geometries, cutbacks, and no doubt over airports there are volumes that you can't, you mustn't break outside of, and so on. How they're represented and whether they represent they're represented in the regulations or whether they're represented in the BIM is an important point. That if the designer represents the planning constraints, someone's going to have to then check the planning constraints so that he hasn't messed. So we have to be really careful about saying there are things we use for design, but they're not part of the regulatory process.
I think to make it even worse, at Schiphol Airport, we're literally still printing stuff from our drawings. For example, the fire departments, because there's just certain regulations that they have to meet, and technology is just not ready yet. So we do gather our data from our models, but we're literally printing it and putting those books in certain rooms that if the fire department is called, we've tried to convince them to start working with iPads and with the technology, but we're just not there yet in reality. So it's a little bit of everything coming together and trying to integrate all of it from 3D, 2D, and was it paper?
I think that 2D drawings are not that evil part, because it's just another kind of abstraction. So 3D is one model that we can view things, and 2D is another way. The only thing that is important, I think, is that the 2D drawings are derived from the model, so they are connected.
Yeah.
But we will still, when you mentioned the emergency case, 2D drawings printed out is a kind of emergency matter that is still important. And we are not machines. We can read those depictions.
But that's a big discussion at least at Schiphol Airport right now, because we're all talking about digitizing and digitalizing.
Sure, absolutely. And in normal life, I would absolutely agree, but for emergencies, it's not that.
But then the challenge is, especially airport environments, they're constantly changing. I mean, when a project delivers, literally the next week something can be changed. We are not updating those printed cards every week. That only happens twice a year. So that's where there's a lot of discussion, because we cannot guarantee to the fire department that they have the most recent drawings, which really for the fire department, it's not even that big of a deal because they're very aware of the changes in the surroundings. But if the city of Amsterdam, for example, comes for whatever regulatory check, then we can get fined if they do not have the right information. So there's a lot of discussion on that right now as well. So yeah, I agree with your statement, but it's definitely still something that is being worked towards.
I'm adding on Ariska's comment and the previous comments, putting my old hat as airport rescue department chairman or fire department chairman. And one of the biggest challenges for that use case on the digital models is the framework where they have to be usable. So if something happens, terminal turns on fire, at least in Finland, the regulation is that they have to be there within the airport in 2 minutes time frame. And that time to upload the full airport model from BIM any tablet in case that you actually are burning an electric station and the Wi-Fi is cut off. Might be a bit challenging though. So I think there's a lack of solutions. It's for training purposes, for simulations, for virtual reality walkthroughs, excellent models, but for rescue actions, the paper is still better. You can fold it over, look it in the car within a few minutes, and you get the basic information. Of course, it can be wrong also there, but on emergency situation, at least the old way is simple.
Thanks, Mika.
Can the regulatory room express how their roadmap is based on this? What kind of, as we now told what we think is a viable solution for us, how we take into account what you said. But is there a roadmap how you check it, how you want to check it, also to check it?
I think we want to check the BIM model because that's the nearest representation to reality you can have. And also, they're never identical. But the checking has got to be based on objects, not lines, etc. And from our experiences and the pilot projects and so on, we know it can be done. And we know that the information requirements to support checking are actually the information requirements that are needed for design anyway. It's actually not, there isn't much information that is required for regulatory compliance that wouldn't be in the model anyway if it was a good model. Occasionally, we find ourselves saying it's important that spaces are classified because most building regulations want to know what a space is used for, and therefore and what the building type is. And you could argue that that is extra information that wouldn't be needed if it was only going to be read by a human, because we can all look at a drawing and say that's a kitchen, that's a bedroom, that's a waiting lounge or whatever. But so the classification of spaces and of many things is really a prerequisite for the information being used in more than one way. If the only thing you want to do with information is to look at drawings, then you don't, you're only talking about geometry effectively. But if you want to use information for any other purpose, you have to have types of object and not building element proxies. You have to have classification.
Okay. Are there any other rooms here? There's the regulatory room. I thought, is there a railway room here too? Anyone? No. Product room is here. Building. Is there someone from the building room here? No other rooms. Okay.
I have a question on this. So I don't understand the needs to speak with the applicants. I mean, if the final outcome is a specific airport domain on the STT, why should you agree with railway on the meaning of that specific entity? I mean, you are not going to change the ICA.
No, we're not. It's just like if we take wayfinding, for example, there's wayfinding at train stations as well. So is it up to the airport room to create a new user-defined type, as in wayfinding, or should we discuss that with the railway room as well? I mean, it might be very straightforward, but it's just, I don't feel like it's up to just the airport room to make a decision on those objects. And therefore the mapping to new user-defined types. That's really the question that we have, and it's actually quite a lot. We mentioned fire safety. There's a lot of objects that for airports are super important. So we have the fire extinguisher, the fire indicator panel. There's some hygiene station. We have hygiene stations everywhere, not just at airports. We have a passive fire protection, a smoke curtain, the wayfinding sign, a waste incinerator. They're all very critical for airports, and we have a proposal. So we can also say, okay, we create a survey, and I will share the survey with the different rooms. and that way, hopefully, people from those rooms will look at the surveys. I can take those entities out, those objects out, and create a separate survey saying airport/other room specific, because there's overlap. There's a lot of different ways we can go around it. The main thing is it's not up to the airport room alone to make a decision of how we're going to call a wayfinding sign or a hygiene station. That's really the question that or comment that I have there.
Yeah. Part of the development process for 4.3 was to look at the domain models that were being proposed by rail, road, and I worked on the ports and waterways, and to look at those and say, of all those things that people have proposed, how many of them really are specific to railway or road or whatever? And a lot of things were, I'm going to say demoted, but that sounds but were put into a lower layer in the schema where they were general architectural items, or general building items, or general infrastructure. And when you look at it closely, the only thing that's special about architecture is that it has doors and windows. Everything else is probably common to every kind of thing in the built environment. I trained for 6.5 years to be an architect, and now I know all I was learning about was doors and windows. Similarly, the ports and waterways came up with navigational aids, and we float them around and you stick them in the ground, but it's the same thing. And so actually the number of things that are specific to domains is always much smaller than people imagine, but everyone works in their own disciplines and believes their job is unique, and or their building type, their construction type is different and special. What my experience tells me is that you mustn't tell people, but most of it's the same.
It definitely. It's just, am I going to add a wayfinding sign to the airport domain extension of the DSCD, or should it be placed somewhere else because it's so general? Yes.
A very good point. I think it's not really clear for me, because a lot of these products I see that a lot of these entities from the airport room are also products coming from the product room. So, and I think it cannot be determined by the date of the year when a project starts and which domain it falls. So if we would have probably started earlier looking at boarding gates, it would end up in the product system, and now it's there. Yeah, I think it's something we need to address on a higher level.
Yeah, and to add to Nick's comment, I'm guessing it was Nick speaking earlier. A lot of these things that are not unique, they still might have a unique property sets. There might be an airport-related aviation navigation parameter or rating or something we need to add there, which has no value for the ports or harbors or waterways. So it's something which can be dealt through that, but we still need to define them. That this is, let's say, the common way of doing it in aviation.
But it's not a problem for the product room in the sense that everything we've been talking about is product of one kind or another. Some things like concrete are thought, not manufactured. The problem for the product room is to think about how things get specified and chosen, and what we can assume about products before we've done that selection. The domain model that we use in the IFC is to try and isolate those things that are specific to the building types or the construction process, or the diagram. But there are only three things that we deal with in our industry: spaces, products, and tasks. And we complicate it and combine them and make life more interesting. But anything physical is effectively a product. it's a product of a construction process or it's a product of a factory that you buy in.
But how do you envisage then the procedure, how to get to a standardization? If you start thinking everything is a product, which maybe cases is possible, then it means that the airport room have particular elements. They say, this is what we think is standard with us. Then we bring it over to the product room and they say, yes, it's good. And we'll look at it. This is what you think the information required. And we can more or less put it in some kind of box where it needs to be in.
Yeah.
And then we have a cooperation.
But still, where are we publishing it?
No, that's the next question.
Well, and I agree, but that's definitely something, I mean, we're looking, from the airport perspective, we're looking at extending the schema with airport-specific entities, so that's what we're just listing on. So I totally agree, but we do also have to think about in what domain are we going to extend IFC? I don't think so. I don't think Leon wants us to extend the schema anymore. So it has to fall in a domain somewhere.
But maybe the domain concept is to limit it here,
Could
because
be, yeah.
because I think every entity we have falls into different domains regarding on the use case of the user. So for a planner in early stage, it's just a boarding gate. It comes clearly from the airport room. But if I am maybe in a purchase department later on, it's a product. I have no idea. Maybe I did not even know that this goes into a product or into an airport.
No, we must be flexible in that.
Flexible, yeah, and we must
So
cross-reference
shift
things and do things like that. So I think
But
it's
then
not
I
a
don't think-
one-to-one relation.
Yeah, well, but then it's still, we need to talk to Leon, like, are we gonna create a high over buildingSMART international domain where all of these are, and then have relations to the different domains, for example, or?
And in Europe,
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of different technical solutions, but I also have to, again, explain it to my organization of how to start using it, and that's usually the biggest challenge. I know there's a lot of technical people here that can make it happen.
But if you're doing a project in the airport room, the outcome is not additions to BSDD. It is a proposal to the standards committee.
Right.
That this material should be added.
Mhm.
And that is, I mean, you know, and that process, certainly, I mean, that's what I can say held up, but that was a key part of the infrastructure project, was that overall review that said, well, ports and waterways, you think that you've got bollards for tying up ships. Hang on, they're just bollards. So actually they moved out of our domain into another. Other things stay, but that is the technical review. And if, for example, the tunnel project comes forward with a proposal for a new geometric representation of soil, then that has to get past the review process to say whether that's constructive or destructive of the interest of IFC as a whole. If they come forward with a proposal for special concrete segments, the answer will be no, it's not that special. It just happens to be curved instead of flat, or I don't know. But so that is the review process, and the better you present it, the more likely it is to be accepted or the right decisions made anyway.
But before this, we check it with you, and when you say this is not the right approach, then we should think about ourselves. We have limited energy, money, and time. So should we have a discussion first? What could be a good approach in this sense, for example, separated phase-wise or whatsoever, that it can shift from one another, or I don't know exactly what you could use.
And I think what Ariska presented earlier was that we're kind of doing this, let's say, industry acceptance process for the airports around the world through the questionnaires, because there's we learned during the project that we're actually naming stuff with different names, and they might have a bit different content, and they might have a different breakout to different parts of the system. You could call the several kilometer long package handling system one system, or you can call it a huge number of conveyor belts. So it's level of detail is also important here, and there's no common regulation on these airports. There's no one ICAO or IATA rule that would say every airport in the world needs to use this definition. That's not existing at the moment.
But when the entities are in use, you will not recognize the domain anymore, will you?
The airport domain?
Yeah, no, if you use an entity in a model, you don't see where it came from. So it's like you go to Google and you don't search for a specific domain. Just search and you get a result no matter where it came from.
Within the PSDD, you can do searches like if you go there today and write airport, it will give a few of our entities and some existing specifications that are taken from classification systems. So.
Yeah.
Okay, well, still managed to fill the whole session, so that's good. Moving forward, I think from the airport room we'll get in touch a little bit more of the separate rooms to see how we can make decisions on how to move forward. Yes.
I have a proposition. Wouldn't it make sense that the product room creates like a structure, like global attributes? So attributes which are valid for every product, because every product has length, height, and stuff like that. And then the different other rooms would just add the specific attributes needed for their unique tasks.
But the generic ones already exist in the FC schema. Length and measurements there.
For the most part, yeah.
Are contained in the FC.
Except for the most part.
I doubt whether a boarding gate is included there.
Oh, no, those are not included, no. Not yet, that's why we're working on this project right now, but I agree. But the general ones, what you're describing, yeah, it could be. I just feel like there's so many rooms right now that have so much overlap, because I also heard there's a new sustainability room. There's people working on facility management. Facility management has overlap as well with all of the different rooms, so I'm kind of losing the overview and the connection between all of this and how to move forward with these kind of technical developments. But yeah, I'm totally open for it. Yeah.
Some rooms are about building types, build types like airports, like road rail, whatever. And some of them are about process, like the construction room or the regulatory room. So you're bound to get some overlap.
Yeah.
For two reasons. One, you can't distinguish building types that easily. And secondly, because we've got this matrix thing where we've got some process rooms and some product rooms, effectively.
But I'm saying like the sustainability, shouldn't that be part of the product room too? The topic sustainability? So now it's a separate room, and I don't know, there's a lot right now. I'm not saying we have to discuss this here right now, but just in general, there's a lot of topics that have overlapped with each other. And I do feel like the separate rooms are moving forward. And in my opinion, too little meetings with the other rooms to discuss these kind of topics. So I'm glad you guys were able to join this session.
Thank you.
Thank you.